The slave market was quieter than usual that gray morning. Frost clung to the edges of cracked stones, and bitter wind threaded through the narrow alleys like a warning. Above, clouds rolled across the sky like bruises, thick and threatening snow, while below, silence draped the square not as peace but as tension. Merchants huddled beneath patched tarps, their breath rising in cold puffs. Old banners flapped weakly against walls of weathered stone. But despite the cold and quiet, cruelty was alive in every corner. Under a sagging tent of fraying cloth she sat. A girl, alien, blue-skinned, thin as a breath, her body curled in on itself like she could disappear if she tried hard enough. Chains hung loosely from her wrists, not tight because they didn't need to be. She didn't run. She didn't move. Her clothes were more rags than fabric, and her bare feet were curled tight against the icy stone, mottled from exposure. She didn't cry. There were no tears left. Her silver eyes stared down, unblinking, locked on the ground. Her mind had drifted far from the noise of barter and barked orders. It had left her behind, perhaps to save her. Maybe that was why she didn't feel the cold anymore, or maybe she was simply too far gone to care. People passed, they always did. Traders, scavengers, mercenaries with thick boots and thicker egos. Some looked at her, most didn't. Once a woman stopped and muttered, "That one? Returned 3 times, no good." Another chuckled. "Broken," he said. "Worth less than the chain she's wearing." The merchant assigned to her stood nearby. A wide man with mechanical arms and a rusted cybernetic eye, he hawked his wares with a voice like a blaster. "Fighters here, strong backs, labor-ready." He motioned to a row of muscle-bound captives with brands and scars and vacant eyes. But no one paused at the corner where she sat, not until he came. He walked slowly. His coat was old but intact, brown dust clinging to the hem. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face half-shadowed by a hood, he didn't move like a buyer. He didn't leer, didn't haggle. He passed the other slaves without comment. Didn't so much as glance at the flashy displays of strength or beauty. He was looking for something else, or maybe not looking at all. And then he saw her. She didn't see him at first. Her gaze was still cast downward, her thoughts too far removed, but something shifted, a silence inside the silence. The air changed. She looked up. Just a second, just enough. Their eyes met, hers hollow and dim, his dark and tired but not unkind. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. But in that space between a heartbeat and the next, something passed between them, not recognition, not hope, just noticing. "That one?" the merchant barked, following the human's gaze. Then he laughed, loud and grating. "Ha, you serious? That's trash. She don't work, barely eats. Didn't even scream when we pulled her out the last time." The human's expression didn't change. "What's your price?" The merchant scoffed. "For her, 1 coin, and that's too generous." He reached into his coat and pulled a single silver piece. Polished, clean, he held it out. The merchant blinked. "Wait, really?" "Yes," the man said. "You want her, she doesn't speak. She's probably sick." I said yes. With a shrug, the merchant took the coin. The chain was unhooked with a mechanical click. She didn't stand until a rough shove pushed her forward. Her legs were like brittle branches. She staggered, almost fell, but caught herself. Her body moved on memory, not will. This was the part where the nightmare restarted. New master, new rules, new pain. She flinched as he stepped toward her. But he didn't grab the chain, didn't yank her forward, didn't even touch her. He turned. "Can you walk?" She nodded barely. He walked, she followed. The market didn't cheer, didn't applaud. Some laughed, others shook their heads. "Poor fool," someone muttered, "bought a corpse with breath. She'll be dead by week's end." But he didn't care. They moved through narrow streets, past shuttered windows and frozen fountains. She followed him, unresisting. Not because she trusted him, but because she had no strength to resist. A small home stood at the city's edge. Plain stone, wooden door, a faint column of smoke rising from the chimney. He opened the door and stepped aside. "Come in," he said. She hesitated. This was the moment it changed. Always, the kindness faded. The truth came out. She waited for the blow, the collar, the command. None came. Inside, the fire crackled gently. The warmth was real. He pointed to a blanket near the hearth. "Sit there, warm yourself." Still wary, she stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a quiet click. The world stayed out. She sat slowly, her back tight with fear. Every nerve screamed to run. But where? He returned moments later with a cup. Steam curled from it, water clean. He placed it near her, then sat across the room. Drink. She reached for it, her fingers trembled, the cup touched her lips and she gasped. Warmth, not just heat, something deeper. He watched but didn't stare. My name is Daniel. She didn't answer. You don't have to talk, he added, just rest. She looked at him, no demand in his eyes, no ownership, only tired kindness. Why, her voice cracked, barely audible. Why did you buy me? He turned his gaze to the fire, because no one else did. That night she didn't dream, she didn't cry. She lay curled on the soft mat, the blanket pulled tight, and listened to the wind howl outside. But inside it was quiet. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. The morning light was weak and gray, barely filtering through the frost-laced window panes. The fire had burned low, but it was still warm enough to chase away the deep cold of night. She stirred beneath the blanket, eyes blinking open to a strange sensation, comfort. Her limbs were sore, her body thin and bruised, but for once she wasn't curled up against stone or steel. The mat beneath her was soft, and the air didn't reek of sweat or fear. She sat up slowly, the blanket falling away. For a moment she panicked, disoriented. Where was the chain, the slap, the barked orders? Then memory returned, flickers of snow, a coin, a quiet voice, the warmth of a fire not meant to punish. Daniel. He wasn't in the room. She glanced around, heart beating faster, anxiety rising. Had he left her? Had it all been a trick? But then the door creaked open, and he entered carrying an armful of chopped wood. His coat was dusted in white. When he saw her sitting up, he offered a nod. Good morning. She didn't answer. He walked to the hearth and stacked the wood. I'll get the fire going again. She watched his every move with quiet suspicion. He didn't move too fast, didn't raise his voice, didn't so much as glance at her in a way that felt wrong. It was disarming, which in itself was frightening. She had learned to expect cruelty, predict it, prepare for it, but kindness, that was chaos. He set a small pot of water to boil, then placed a wooden bowl on the floor near her, along with a piece of crusty bread and a spoon. Soup's thin, he said, but warm. She stared at the food like it was a trap. Eat if you're hungry. He didn't force her, didn't hover. He simply moved to the corner, sat on a stool, and pulled out a small box filled with nails and scraps of wood. He began to repair something small, maybe a drawer, maybe nothing important. She reached out slowly. The bread was rough but not stale. The soup, when she finally brought the spoon to her lips, was a miracle: onions, potatoes, a bit of root vegetable. Nothing luxurious, but her stomach reacted with a confused sort of joy. What do I call you? He asked without looking up. She paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. Her voice, when it came, was a whisper. I don't know. He glanced at her. You had a name. They took it. He gave a small nod. Then you get to choose a new one when you're ready. She lowered her gaze again. No one had ever asked her to choose anything. Every part of her had always been decided for her: name, clothes, meals, punishments. And now, suddenly, she could choose. Later that day, he showed her the garden behind the house. The soil was frozen, the plants long dead. But beneath the ice lay the promise of life. He handed her a pair of oversized gloves and a scarf. She didn't understand at first, but when he pulled on his own coat and nodded toward the door, she followed. I come out here to think, he said, crunching over the snow. Peaceful. She followed in silence, boots borrowed and too large, scarf tickling her chin. The field stretched behind the cabin, ringed by trees and low hills. It looked like a place no one had ever screamed. I've been here 5 years, he said, stopping near a crooked fence. Grew tired of noise, politics, war. She didn't answer. You can stay, he added. Her eyes darted to him. Why? Because you need a place. And what do you get? Company. She stared at the ground. What do I have to do? Nothing. Her voice trembled. No work, no service. Nothing, he said, just heal. And then came the moment she would remember for the rest of her life. He turned away and added, You are not a thing. She didn't cry, not then, not yet, but something cracked. That night she sat by the fire, eyes fixed on the flames. He handed her a worn book and a pencil. Can you read? She shook her head. Want to learn? She looked up, uncertain. No rush, he said, only if you want. And so it began, slowly, like breathing for the first time after being held underwater. Small lessons, safe silences, no touches unless initiated, no shouting, no punishments, just patience. He taught her to read letters to write her name, or at least what would become her name. She experimented with words, sometimes scribbling on the table when she thought no one was watching. Once she drew a flower. He said it looked like hope. One morning she asked, "What is your name again?" "Daniel." She whispered it, testing the sound. "Daniel." He smiled, "And you?" She hesitated, then for the first time she said, "Mira." "Mira," he repeated like it was something sacred. "That's a good name." She hugged herself. "I want it to be mine." "It is." And so began the real healing. But healing, she would learn, was not a straight line. It zigzagged, it stopped, it bled. One night she screamed in her sleep. Daniel rushed into the room, but she had already curled up in the corner, rocking. He stopped at the threshold. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked. She didn't answer. So he sat down, just inside the room, but didn't approach. She cried quietly for an hour. In the morning, he brought her tea. Nothing was said, nothing needed to be. Another day, she offered to help him mend a hole in the roof. She was clumsy with the tools, but he guided her hand gently. "You're not afraid of me?" he asked. She whispered, "A little, but less than before." He smiled. "That's progress." Progress. One afternoon, she carved something out of a piece of scrap wood. It was a little figure, hunched but still standing. She placed it on the mantel without a word. The next morning, it had been moved beside a potted plant, a place of honor. "You moved it." He nodded. "Looks better there." She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. But inside her, something began to unfurl, like the petals of a flower thawing in the sun. The wind outside was changing. The air no longer bit as sharply. Icicles began to weep under the touch of midday sun. Spring, while still hidden, whispered promises through the cracks in the cabin walls. Inside, Mira was changing, too. The days passed slowly, rhythmically. Mornings began with the soft crackle of firewood and the quiet clink of dishes. Daniel always rose early. Mira soon did too, no longer startled awake by terror, but stirred by the smell of bread or the gentle rustle of movement. She never announced herself. She would simply appear, standing silently near the door, arms crossed and eyes alert. She didn't speak much, not yet, but she listened, and she watched. Daniel taught her to stir the soup, to test the kettle for boiling, to slice vegetables with safe hands. The first time she dropped a bowl, she froze, panic rising like bile in her throat. Daniel looked up from the fire, eyes calm. He said nothing, didn't shout, didn't strike her, just picked up a broom and swept the mess. "It's just a bowl," he said. Those 4 words echoed for hours in her mind. It's just a bowl. He trusted her more with each day. One morning, he handed her a list written in shaky but readable letters and a small leather pouch of coins. "From the village," he said. "Eggs, salt, only if you feel ready." Her hands closed around the pouch like it might vanish. "Alone." He nodded. "They know you're with me." It took her over an hour to reach the village. Every noise made her flinch. Every glance felt like a spotlight, but no one stopped her. No one touched her. An old woman at the stall nodded when she saw her. "Daniel's girl." Mira hesitated, then nodded. "You're taller than he said." The woman passed her the eggs, wrapped them carefully. "Tell him to stop burning the bread." When Mira returned to the cabin, her face was red from wind, but also from something else. Pride. For the first time in years, she'd walked among people without chains. Days turned into weeks. She began to hum while chopping herbs. She asked Daniel if she could repaint the table. She carved a second figure, this one a fox, and placed it beside the first. Daniel smiled when he saw it. "You're good at that," he said. She shrugged, "Just something to do." "No," he said, lifting the fox carefully. "It means something." She didn't reply, but inside her warmth bloomed. Then came the dreams. Not nightmares, not anymore. Now she dreamed of colors, of growing things, of walking barefoot through grass. Once she dreamed of a tree with lights hanging from its branches, and when she reached out to touch one, it turned into a tiny version of herself, smiling. When she told Daniel, he simply nodded. "Your mind's healing too." Spring arrived with full breath. Snow melted into rich earth. Buds pushed through the soil behind the house. They planted seeds together. Mira at first was hesitant. She had never worked the land, but Daniel showed her how to press the soil gently, how to whisper to it if she liked. Some say it helps them grow. She whispered names, not real ones, just sounds. Joy, hum, bell, home. And every day the garden grew. Then came the footprint. Daniel noticed it first. He was walking near the edge of the field when he stopped cold. The dirt, soft from thawing, held a clear mark. Large, heavy, not his. Mira was nearby, placing tools back in the shed. When he called her over, she saw it and her body locked. "That's them," she whispered. Daniel's brow furrowed. "You're sure?" She nodded. "The one who trained us. His boots always left that mark." Days passed. The footprint faded, but the fear didn't. Mira started waking in the middle of the night, clutching her carving knife. She paced the cabin, watched the trees. Daniel reinforced the locks on the door, added new bolts, sharpened the axe. "We're not going to let them take you," he said. "They don't stop," she replied. "Neither will we." And when the moment came, it was sudden. Two men, one tall and thin, the other broad-shouldered. Both armored, both familiar. Mira was washing clothes by the creek when she heard the rustle, a voice behind her mocking. "We found our little stray." She dropped the basin and ran. Daniel was chopping wood when she burst through the trees, eyes wide, breath ragged. "They're here." He didn't ask, didn't hesitate. He moved fast, pulled her behind him as two figures stepped into the clearing. "Step aside, human," the broad one growled. "She's property." "Not anymore." The tall one smirked. "You think you can keep her?" "I'm not keeping her. She stays because she chooses." "Choice," the man laughed. "They don't get choices." Behind Daniel, Mira stepped forward. "I do now." The men tensed, "So she talks." "I scream too," she said, and threw a fistful of dirt into their faces. During their confusion, Daniel lunged. The axe handle struck the tall one hard. The broad one swung, catching Daniel in the ribs. Mira screamed, ran to the shed, grabbed the shovel. When she returned, the tall one had Daniel pinned. She didn't stop to think. She charged. The shovel struck the man's back with a crack. Disoriented, he stumbled. Daniel twisted free. Then the broad one raised a weapon. "No," Daniel growled, stepping between them. The blast came but misfired. The old tech sparked and died. Mira took the chance. She grabbed a heavy stone and threw it. It struck the man's leg. He howled. "Leave," she said, standing tall. "You can't win," one of them spat. "I already did." And slowly they backed off, not defeated but shaken. When they vanished into the trees, Mira dropped the shovel. Daniel dropped to one knee. She ran to him. "Are you hurt?" "Not bad," he winced. "You?" She shook her head. "You fought." "We fought." And that night, for the first time, she sat beside him at the fire and didn't flinch when his hand brushed hers. The morning after the attack, a hush settled over the forest. It wasn't fear, it was clarity. The kind of quiet that came when two people had faced something together and survived. The kind that echoed not with silence but with understanding. Daniel moved slower that morning. His ribs ached. Mira brewed tea from dried roots, handing him the cup with both hands. She didn't ask if he was okay. She already knew. "You'll have bruises," she said. He smirked. "Worth it." She didn't smile, not quite, but her hand lingered a second longer on the cup before pulling away. Later, Daniel returned to the woodshed to repair the broken latch. Mira followed without being asked. She brought her own hammer, the handle still awkward in her grip. She stood beside him as he measured and nailed and winced through pain. Every once in a while, she held a board in place, not because he told her, because she wanted to. When the work was done, Daniel straightened, wiped his forehead with a rag, and looked toward the trees. "They might come back." "Let them," Mira said. He blinked. "You're not afraid." "I am," she admitted, "but I'm not running." She didn't say it to be brave. She said it because it was true. In the following days, something shifted in her. She didn't pace the floor at night. She didn't jump at every branch creek. Instead, she carved, for hours, in silence, in focus. She shaped wood with a careful hand, smoothing rough edges, detailing petals, wings, faces. She made things small and perfect, things that felt like truth. And Daniel, for the first time since she arrived, left her alone to do it. Not out of neglect, but out of trust. Then the whispers began. 3 slave hunters had returned to the village, limping, bruised, humiliated. Their story came wrapped in anger and disbelief. They claimed the girl had gone feral, that she'd attacked, that the human was shielding a thief. But the villagers had eyes and memories. First came the baker, a small, wrinkled man with hands like bark. He showed up at Daniel's cabin with a wrapped bundle. "I brought bread," he said. Daniel hesitated. "Why?" "Because we were wrong," the man replied. Mira peeked from behind the door. The baker saw her and his eyes softened. "You okay, girl?" She nodded slowly. "Good," he handed her the loaf. "No one should go hungry for being brave." That evening, she ate a slice of bread she hadn't cooked herself, and it tasted like belonging. Next came a woman with jet-black gloves and a neat bundle of cloth in her arms. She didn't smile, didn't make speeches. She placed the cloth on a chair and said, "Thread and buttons. I make clothes if she wants something custom." Mira touched the fabric. Her fingers trembled. "Thank you," she said. The woman shrugged. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "My daughter, she's gone now, but she would have liked you." Mira didn't know what to say, so she folded the cloth and held it against her chest. A day later, a farmer left a bag of seeds on the doorstep. A child delivered a drawing of a blue-skinned girl smiling beside a flower. And slowly, cautiously, the village remembered how to care. Mira began walking into town with Daniel on market days. She didn't speak to many, but she smiled at the ones who tried. The butcher gave her extra scraps for stew. The candlemaker taught her how to dye wax. The librarian showed her books with pictures of galaxies and birds and statues from old Earth. And every night she returned home with something new. Not an item, not even knowledge. Pieces of herself. Her table by the window soon filled with carvings. Animals, dancers, trees, stars. One was a girl standing alone, face lifted to the sky. "That one's you," Daniel said. She shook her head. "That one's who I want to be." He nodded. "You're closer than you think." One afternoon, Mira stood in the garden holding a simple wooden flower. She ran her fingers along its edge, thoughtful. "Do you think it matters?" "What?" Daniel asked from the porch. "What I make, what I say. Do you think it matters to anyone but me?" He walked over, took the flower gently. "It matters," he said, "because you made it." That night, she placed the flower in a box and carved a sun on the lid. Within a week, people began coming to buy her work, not out of pity, not even out of curiosity. Because they were beautiful. Her name started to spread, not whispered with suspicion, but spoken with admiration. "Mira made that." "You should ask Mira. She knows how to shape light into wood." She was no longer the girl from the market. She was the carver, the quiet one, the one who knew pain and still chose beauty. In the evenings, children gathered outside her door to hear her stories. She didn't tell them about cages or chains, not at first. She spoke of flowers that grew in snow, of birds that forgot how to fly but learned again, of stars that fell and became seeds in the dirt. The children listened with wide eyes. They didn't ask where she came from. They asked what she would carve next. And so she carved and healed and told the world who she was. Mira. The seasons rolled gently into summer. Wildflowers spread across the edge of the valley, painting the hillsides with soft yellows and pinks. The garden behind the cabin grew thick and green, bursting with tomatoes, beans, and herbs. Laughter, real, whole laughter, began to echo from the cabin's walls. Mira now stood taller, not just in posture, but in presence. Her voice, once small and uncertain, now had strength, not loud, but steady. Her eyes no longer darted for exits. They met people, held them, greeted them. Her carvings reached homes across the village. A pair of dancers stood on the town hall's shelf. A fox curled beside a sleeping child in the school. A tree reaching toward the sky rested in the healer's hut. Everyone wanted a piece of what she made, not because it was hers, but because somehow it reflected something they needed to see. One morning, Daniel returned from the woods to find her standing by the window, holding a coin. "This was yours," she said, turning it in her fingers. He paused. "You found it." "In your drawer." She didn't sound guilty, just thoughtful. He walked over. "I kept it to remind me of that day, of what it meant. To buy a person. To believe in one." She looked at him, eyes soft. "I want to give it back." "Mira." "Not as repayment," she said quickly, "but as a gift, a new meaning." She opened her hand. The coin gleamed in the sun, its surface newly polished. On one side was her name, carved carefully with the tip of her blade. On the other, a simple flower. Daniel reached out, touched the coin like it might vanish. You made this. For you, so you'll never forget what a single choice can become. He swallowed, words failed him, but she didn't need them. Her smile was enough. Later that week, the village held its first midsummer festival in years. Lights were strung from tree to tree, the square filled with music and warmth. Children raced with streamers. Elders sipped spiced wine. At the center of it all stood Mira, wearing a dress she made herself, stitched with stars along the hem. When she stepped into the square, the crowd paused. Not in judgment, not in memory of what she'd been. In awe of who she had become. Daniel stood by the music stand, watching her. She walked toward him barefoot, the earth warm under her steps. "Dance with me," she said. He offered his hand, always. They didn't dance perfectly. Their steps weren't rehearsed, but they moved in rhythm and everyone stepped back to let them spin. Near the firelight, she caught glimpses of her past in the crowd. Not the pain, but the proof. The baker's warm nod. The librarian's proud look. The child holding one of her carvings like a treasure. When the music slowed, she stepped onto a small stage. Someone handed her a wooden flower carved earlier that week. She held it up. "I was once sold for a coin," she said. Her voice did not shake. "Not because I was worth less, but because they couldn't see my worth. One person did, and that changed everything." She looked at Daniel, who stood in the crowd now, arms crossed but eyes glimmering. "He gave me space, not commands, silence, not shame. He gave me time to remember who I was and courage to decide who I could become." She knelt and handed the wooden flower to a small alien girl sitting cross-legged in the front row. The child took it carefully, eyes wide. "You are not what they call you," Mira said. "You are what you choose to become." Silence, then applause. Not polite, not formal. Real, thunderous, emotional. And in that moment, Mira stood not as a survivor, but as a symbol. Back at the cabin that evening, Daniel placed the polished coin on a shelf beside her first carving. Mira walked to him, quiet. "I thought that coin measured my value," she said, "but now I know it never could." He looked at her. "You were always more." She reached out, took his hand. "Thank you." He shook his head. "You did this, Mira, not me. You chose to stay, to try, to hope." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You gave me the chance." They stood together, the night wrapping them in soft darkness. Outside, fireflies danced over the garden. Laughter from the festival still echoed faintly across the hills. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. "Every time I see you smile." Mira stepped closer, rested her head against his chest. "I was so afraid. I thought it was a trick, that your kindness had a trap. And now I'm afraid of losing it." He brushed her hair back. "Then hold on tighter, because I'm not going anywhere." Summer deepened. Their lives folded gently into a new rhythm. People came and went, stories shared over meals and repairs. The cabin grew with an extra room built by the village carpenter. Children brought their carvings to show Mira, asking for tips. Neighbors brought harvest gifts. A sign was hung above her window, Mira's hands, carvings, and stories. One day, a merchant from a distant town came seeking her. He offered coins for her pieces, promises of fame. "You could be known across the stars," he said. Mira smiled. "I already am here." She kept the cabin, the garden, the woods, the man who had seen her in the dust and chosen not to walk away. When she sat by the fire now, she carved less for memory and more for joy. Foxes, trees, flowers, people. One figure she carved with trembling fingers. A girl, small but upright, holding hands with a man whose face bore no mask, only peace. When she gave it to Daniel, she whispered, "This is us." "Who we were." "No," she said, "who we are." The coin remained on the shelf, not forgotten but transformed. Not a price, a promise. The story of Mira and Daniel didn't end with a festival or a carving or a speech. It lived on in every hand that held one of her pieces. In every child that sat at her feet. In every heart that remembered that kindness, not cruelty, can spark revolutions. Not in fire, but in one act. One coin. One flower. One choice. And the courage to see someone when no one else did.